All right. Super short presentation. Well, that's a lie. Um, this is just a presentation on a type of activity that I think we could focus on. The thought is not completely baked out yet, but I just want to bring the idea already into the conversation. First thing is that I think that with our demands on different levels, wherever we're active in universities, municipalities, or so, we should communicate much more why we want institutions to tell the truth, because people, individuals, have the right to information, and this is enshrined in laws such as the Paris Agreement, the Aarhus Convention, but also in the human rights. The human rights to freedom of speech entails also the human right to information. So there's this legal component, but there's also the moral component, because people need information to make decisions. So on the abstract and kind of financial terms, people look at risks, people look at opportunities, and taken together, this is what makes the decisions. But on the concrete level, this means that, for example, investors, they look at information to make investment decisions, but also other people make, for example, decisions where they move to. Or I come to the example of farmers in a bit. Farmers make decisions if they want to invest in dairy or if they want to invest in something else, based on what they think is the situation. Currently, people don't have the information on climate change that they need. We should focus on this much more in our communication, especially when we talk to institutions. Currently, the Dutch government is completely failing on communicating the dangers of climate change. So there's this report that came out, how few people in the Netherlands are actually concerned or even aware of the climate crisis. And this is kind of obvious. If you look at the Dutch at the website of the Dutch government, you find this. It says the causes of climate change. And it says, well, the climate changes for different reasons. It's because there are different activities of the sun, CO2 emissions are rising. There are also volcanoes that break out, or meteorites that break into the atmosphere. This is what you find at the moment on the website of the Dutch government. They don't even acknowledge that climate change is mainly human-driven. And then it's obvious that people also don't know the dangers of climate change. But also more specifically, people are not just not aware of climate change. Many people who are aware don't have the information to make decisions. So I talked during the Christmas break to a farmer in my home in Friesland, in the top left, in Germany. And he said, yeah, I'm aware that climate change is happening, but I don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 years, 2 years, 10 years, whatever. So how could I use this information that climate change is happening to actually make decisions? So he's investing right now with 1.5 million euros into the construction of a new dairy farm. And I stand next to him and I think, of course, well, probably in the next 2, 5, whatever years, dairy farming will have to be cut down, and then he will lose his investment. So this lack of information is really taking away from him the ability to make decisions, and we should point this out. While he is lacking this information, there are actually a lot of institutions, and specifically finance and insurance institutions, that have this information. You can look into ESG, environmental, social, and governance products, and that's really being pushed at the moment by investors like BlackRock, that invest millions into the analysis of climate change so that they can make better investment decisions. So this knowledge about climate impacts, or also the risks from regulations that might come in the future, is actually available, but often it sits in these institutions that can make money with it. So there is this information asymmetry. Those who can afford analysis products and are often active in investments, they actually have information about the possible impacts of climate change or of regulations, while those that don't have the money or the information, the connections to access this information, make decisions based on wrong information, and that's unfair. So what to do about this? So what I want to propose now is as much something that we as XR can take up, but also as individuals in the networks that we are part of. But before I want to make the proposal, I want to look at 2 examples from the UK that I came across lately. And it's both examples for citizens' assemblies, but also for other participatory projects. The first one is the Devon climate emergency. Devon is a region in the southwest of the UK, and this is a quite interesting process, and I will just quickly run through it step by step. In Devon, there's a climate emergency response group that formed based on 25, by now it could be a couple more, seniors from local council, business, NGOs, to a broad coalition that signed a declaration and formed this response group. This declaration, it's not too long, it's like 1 page, but the basic points of it is that these people with the signing of this declaration said, okay, there is a climate crisis. They committed to take action against it. So it's a typical climate action kind of signature. They list concrete fields of actions that should be taken in Devon to draw down emissions. They call on the government to draw down emissions, and that's the interesting part, they appointed a net zero task force. So this net zero task force consists of 12 members. It's all people from sciences. Interestingly, people from, well, this Professor Patrick Devine Wright, climate scientist, but also engaged in participatory democracy. So these formed this task force, and the task force got, well, the task to work on a Devon carbon plan, a plan how to draw down emissions. And this plan is actually written in a participatory way. So they gather information on different fields of action, such as the built environment, mobility, and so on, but also on cultural change. So they had hearings, they had opens, call for submissions, but then this information that they gathered with evidence on what kind of steps could be taken in Devon was given to us, or is now being given to a citizens' assembly. So I won't go now into the details of the citizens' assembly, but basically this broad coalition of as much societal as public figures creates now a citizens' assembly with 100 randomly selected people, and these now deliberate about the question, how can we achieve a net zero Devon as rapidly, as fairly as possible? And that's interesting. And the question, they don't talk about the target. So not like XR is demanding, or other groups, or it's the municipality of Amsterdam that says we want to be carbon neutral in 2050. They say, how can we achieve this as rapidly and fairly as possible? And the Citizens' Assembly will address who should act. So this could be as much the public bodies again, but also private bodies. Like they could give recommendations to companies or to universities. They say what they should do, where it should happen, and when it should happen. And they take input from this evidence gathering process. And then the recommendations that they make are given back to the Net Zero Task Force, and the Net Zero Task Force shows in a transparent way how they will use this input from the Citizens' Assembly to draft a Devon carbon plan. It's not completely clear how the Devon carbon plan then will be used, but I will get back to this later, how I think we can go about this. Now, in addition to this, there is another process going on right now in Cambridgeshire, where also we have a lot of groups that declared a climate emergency, but not a lot happened after that. So it's a bit like the situation in Amsterdam, where you have the emergency declaration, but no action is taken afterwards. And so a group of professors and other civil society people, they got together and made this group Cambridgeshire Climate Emergency. And where we'll get, like what I want to show in this part is that while in the Devon case, the participation happened completely in the planning phase. So in the process of devising a plan, how to go about something. In the Cambridgeshire case, the participation actually happens in the implementation phase. So on the right side, you have kind of the idea of Devon. So people give input to a process, but then the implementation of this process is happening top down mainly. So through big institutions or through governmental institutions. But there's also, of course, we have in the last years experienced how organized civil society groups can actually get stuff done. So bottom up. We saw this 2015. I saw this in Germany when the refugee crisis, or whatever you want to call it, happened, how thousands of people organized and actually got stuff done. They built tents, they transported food, they produced food, and so on. We see it in the transition movement that exists now already for quite long, and actually draws down emissions in their local areas, creates resilient communities. And of course, we see it with Extinction Rebellion. It's thousands of people getting together and actually organizing and producing events and all these kinds of things. So we have seen the power of, like, the people power of networking already. And there's no reason why this energy could not also be used to actually, well, face the climate crisis, mitigate and adapt to it. So what they do in Cambridgeshire, this group, that Cambridgeshire Climate Emergency, is they create a setup which they facilitate people power, so people organizing, but not, as in the case of XR, to protest, but to actually draw down emissions. So what they do is they provide resources, they provide actively information, and that's the interesting part. They really look into how can they communicate effectively the climate crisis, so that the climate crisis exists. So that's the climate science part. But they also communicate how to draw down emissions. So they want to give tools, information to people, how they can organize as small groups, 10, 20, 100 people in local areas, and give them the information that they need to find out how they can draw down emissions. So for example, install sustainable energy production in their local area, local food production, and these kinds of things. They provide data visualizations like the one below to show people how the climate crisis will or could impact them. And they provide information on how people can organize. So there's really this focus on organizing. They will provide trainings and support. They just started, so they're not at this point yet. And that's similar to the Devon case, they're working towards a citizens assemblies and people's assemblies that are organized in this coalition that is part of Cambridgeshire Emergency. For example, these citizens assemblies, you could imagine, could come together to decide how funding is allocated to different local projects. You could also think there about other processes like participatory budgeting, where also you have a pool of money and the people participating in certain processes decide themselves where the money goes. Okay, so what are the conclusions from these two projects? I think directions where we should go towards right now with the network that we have in Extinction Rebellion or other groups could be to get a similar coalition going. So we get a number of seniors from companies, local councils, universities, and NGOs to sign a climate emergency declaration that could be very similar to the Devon Declaration, but it should have a statement about the right to information. So really focusing on, okay, people have a right to information, they don't get this information, we will provide this information. So like what I said above. And a commitment to support a project similar to the Cambridgeshire program. Then, of course, taking concrete steps in a defined period of time to work towards the implementation of such a Cambridgeshire-like program. And then, and this could either be part of this coalition or Extinction Rebellion could focus on this, targeting the government, banks, and insurance companies to make this information available. So we focus on the tell the truth demand. So why should we do all of this? I think we would communicate vulnerability. We would focus much more on the fact that the climate crisis will impact people and how it will impact people. And we would actually make this information useful for these people so that they can make better decisions. We would make alliances. We could, for example, reach out to certain institutions that are not completely opposed to the situation, like to our demands, like the universities or local councils, to join us basically. But at the same time, we would target the elites. So we would focus much more on the ones who are driving actually the emergency or who are withholding information from people. We would definitely increase awareness for the emergency. So first through providing information directly, but also through these participatory processes like in Cambridgeshire. Has been shown many times that people who participate in citizens' assemblies or in participatory budgeting processes, that they actually understand and accept also much more the effects of the climate emergency. We would focus on visioning. So we, and this could be again XR or this coalition, it could be, and probably it should be under a different name, would actually provide ideas how to go about this. And this would also work against the despair. So people at the moment have more and more at least subconsciously this aware understanding that the climate crisis is happening, but they have no acting opportunities. So we would provide ideas about this. And this would be, for example, interesting to work together with groups like Drawdown. We could celebrate victories, which I think in this stage is very important for the people who are now active in the movement for 12, 14 months, or maybe longer, maybe a bit less. But this feeling that we are not getting like the big changes that we want is kind of holding people back. And I think it's important that we celebrate victories. And we would work towards work towards the mission statement of the Rebellion Week, because we would inspire and empower a diverse Dutch public to rebel for life. And again, there we need to, I think, keep the point in mind that rebelling means definitely to be an activist. And I think we should always communicate this as individuals or as XR, that we need to target the elites. But it's also being a community builder. So we would allow people to make this first step to take action on the climate emergency, while continuously communicating that there are certain institutions like the government that hold the responsibility, the main responsibility to act, and that are failing to do so. And so we would build alliances with these people, get started to work, increase our legitimacy and sympathy for ourselves, but also for these people, while clearly pointing out who is doing wrong. So this is just a short proposal, and I would be happy to further develop this, think about this with you or with other people. Yeah, please just send me, please just get in touch. Okay, let's leave it to that. Thanks.